All right, let's jump right in. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into corporate social responsibility, or CSR. And we've got this really cool piece from a French communications consultant, Wowcom Sibo.
Oh, yeah, I've seen this one.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff, really gets into how companies are going beyond just like talking about CSR and actually like really making it a core part of what they do.
Yeah, it's like CSR has become almost like a badge of honor now.
You're totally right. Consumers, investors, even employees are all looking at companies and seeing, how do they treat the environment? What's their social impact?
Absolutely. It's not just like a checkbox anymore. It's like a core value, right?
Yeah.
And this article really gets into like how important communication is to making all of that actually happen.
So let's get into Wowkind Sibo's
Yeah.
take on this. They start out by saying that, CSR needs to be like baked into the DNA of the company, not just some PR stunt. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. It's got to be real. And they talk about this idea of having a really strong CSR policy, almost like a constitution, for how they're going to approach all these different things. And they bring up some interesting frameworks like the Global Reporting Initiative and the UN Global Compact.
How interesting. So it's not about like, every single company coming up with their own thing from scratch. It's more about aligning with some kind of like established standards, right?
Yeah, exactly. Those frameworks kind of give everyone a shared language, a set of metrics that you can use to measure your performance socially and environmentally.
So it's like having a universal translator for CSR, right?
Yeah.
So everyone can understand what each company is actually, measuring and how they're doing.
Exactly. Yeah. Makes it a lot easier to compare different companies and their efforts.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But having a policy, that's just the first step, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It can't just be something that, sits on the shelf and gathers dust. The article really stresses how important it is to get every single employee on board, from like the CEO all the way down to the newest intern.
So we're talking about training, like internal awareness campaigns, really making it part of the daily conversation in the workplace.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And they go even further than that. They talk about integrating CSR into like every step of the supply chain, which I thought was really interesting.
Oh, wow. So that's a big deal.
Yeah. Like from sourcing the raw materials to the manufacturing process, even how the products are disposed of eventually, all of that needs to be considered through the lens of, social and environmental responsibility.
So like a clothing company can't say they're ethical if they're using, sweatshop labor in their factories, even if they've got a really fancy headquarters. It's like LED certified or whatever.
Yeah, it's got to be like a holistic approach. A company can't just cherry pick the parts they want to focus on.
Right, right. So it's a big challenge then, especially for like global companies.
For sure. It's a lot to keep track of. But if a company is really walking the walk, how do they talk about it in a way that people actually believe? Because the article spends a lot of time on that, right?
Yeah, they do. And one thing that has stood out to me was their emphasis on transparency. Like, it's not just about bragging about your successes. It's about being honest about the challenges you're facing.
Yeah, I think that's so important. It's like saying, hey, we're not perfect, but we're trying, we're working on it, and here's how. And that actually builds more trust with people.
Because people can smell BS a mile away, right? Especially when it comes to CSR.
Oh, absolutely. Consumers are smart. They can tell when a company is just trying to greenwash themselves. So authenticity is key here.
Okay, so what are some specific things companies can do to, achieve that kind of transparency? I know Wowcom Sibo has pretty specific suggestions.
Yeah, one of the things they mentioned was the annual CSR report, which I think is a great idea. It's basically like a public record of how the company's doing in terms of their social and environmental impact.
So it's kind of like a report card for their CSR efforts, showing everyone the good and the bad.
Exactly. And by making that report public, it shows that they're willing to be held accountable.
It shows they're not afraid of being judged based on their actions.
Right, right. And it's not just about like broadcasting information. It's also about having a two-way conversation. The article really stresses the importance of companies getting feedback from their stakeholders, like customers, employees, community members.
So it's about listening to what people actually care about rather than just telling them how good you are.
Exactly. That kind of open communication is so important for building trust and showing that you're actually committed to doing the right thing.
And I imagine it also helps companies stay ahead of the curve, like adapting to changing expectations before they become, big problems.
Absolutely. It's like creating a feedback loop that helps them be more responsive and proactive.
And speaking of being proactive, the article also talks about how it's not enough to just say you're doing good. You actually have to, take concrete actions that make a real impact. What are some examples of that?
Well, they mention supporting relevant charities, which I think is a great way to start, whether it's through financial donations, volunteering, or even just sharing expertise.
So it's about putting your money where your mouth is, so to speak.
Yeah, and aligning your resources with the causes that you claim to care about. And they also talk about designing eco-friendly products.
That's a big one.
Yeah. Like reducing carbon footprint, using recycled materials, really making sustainability a core part of your business model.
And of course, there's also promoting diversity and inclusion within the company itself.
Right. You got to walk the walk internally, too.
All of those things show a real commitment, and it's more than just, a greenwashing campaign.
It's about substance over style. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right.
But what about communicating those actions effectively? Like, how do you talk about the good you're doing without sounding like you're bragging?
That's a really good question. And the article had some interesting insights on that, too. I think the key takeaway is authenticity. Like being genuine in your communication, using language that resonates with your audience.
So ditching the corporate jargon and talking to people like real people.
Exactly. And they also suggest letting real people tell their stories. Employees, customers, partners who have actually been impacted by the company's efforts.
Oh, so instead of just saying, we donated X amount to charity, you share a story about how that donation actually helped a specific community.
Yeah, exactly. Those personal stories are way more powerful than just a dry press release or a bullet point in a report. They help to humanize the company and their efforts.
And it avoids that feeling of being lectured to, which people don't really like.
Exactly. It's about sharing real experiences and connecting with people on a deeper level. And there's one more thing they emphasize, which I think is really important.
Okay, what's that?
Being honest about the areas where you're still working to improve.
So admitting that you're not perfect, that you're still on a journey, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because no company is perfect, and admitting that actually builds trust and credibility.
Because it shows that you're actually committed to continuous improvement.
Right. It's about being honest and transparent even when it's tough, and recognizing that CSR is not like a destination, it's a journey. It's something you're always working on.
And that journey is more meaningful when you're sharing it with the world, right?
Absolutely. When companies are open about their CSR efforts, it inspires others to do the same. It creates this ripple effect of positive change.
So it's not just about one company doing good. It's about pushing the entire business world towards a more sustainable and responsible future.
Exactly. And that's where the power of communication really comes in.
Wow, this is really fascinating stuff. I feel like we've just scratched the surface here.
Oh, yeah, for sure. There's so much more to unpack.
It's interesting how much Wowcom SIBO talks about storytelling, as a way to communicate about CSR.
Yeah, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Stories are so powerful, they can really cut through all the noise and connect with people.
Definitely. It's way more engaging than just hitting people with a bunch of facts and figures.
Like, think about it. Which would you be more interested in? A company saying they reduced their carbon footprint by 15%, or hearing a story about the team of engineers who made it happen.
Oh yeah, the engineer story for sure.
Exactly. It makes it so much more relatable and tangible, You see the human side of it.
And it builds trust, right? Because you see the actual people behind the effort.
Exactly. It puts a face to the company's values.
Speaking of trust, how do we as consumers know if a company's really being genuine about their CSR? How do we tell the difference between real action and just clever marketing?
That's the million-dollar question, right? I think it starts with being a more critical consumer. Don't just take their word for it. You gotta do your research, look for evidence to back up their claims.
So go beyond the slogans and the headlines.
Right, exactly. Check out their CSR report, look for third-party certifications, see if they're involved in any, sustainability initiatives.
Okay, that makes sense. What about companies that aren't as transparent? Should we assume they're hiding something?
Not necessarily. Sometimes there are legitimate reasons why a company might not be able to disclose everything, like competitive concerns or legal reasons.
Okay.
But I think it's always fair to ask questions like, reach out to the company, engage with them on social media, let them know that transparency is important to you as a consumer.
So it's about holding them accountable, but in a constructive way.
Exactly. And remember, no company is perfect, right? It's a journey. We should expect them to be making a genuine effort and being open about their progress.
So we've talked a lot about what companies should be doing, But are there any examples of like CSR initiatives that just totally backfired?
Oh, yeah, there are tons. I think one of the most common ones is what people call greenwashing.
Right, where a company tries to make themselves look environmentally friendly without actually changing anything about their practices.
Yeah, like a company might launch this huge marketing campaign about sustainability, but they're still getting their products from, unsustainable suppliers.
Right, or they make a small donation to some environmental cause while their core business is still, super polluting.
Exactly. And consumers are getting wise to that. When a company's actions don't match their words, it really damages their trust.
Yeah, it can even lead to boycotts and all sorts of bad PR.
For sure. Authenticity is just so crucial here.
People can really sense when a company is genuine, and they're more likely to support a company that's aligned with their own values, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just about avoiding negative outcomes. CSR can actually be really good for business.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, when companies prioritize social and environmental responsibility, they often have to, come up with new, more sustainable products and processes.
So it drives innovation.
Yeah, exactly. For example, a company that wants to reduce their carbon footprint might invest in renewable energy or develop more efficient manufacturing methods.
And then they can use those innovations to, stand out from the competition.
Right. Consumers are increasingly looking for products and services that reflect their values. So companies that can demonstrate a real commitment to CSR, they usually end up with more loyal customers.
It's not just about doing good then, it's also about doing well.
Exactly. It's about creating a business model that's sustainable in the long term for the company and the planet.
So it sounds like we're moving towards a future where CSR is just like a normal part of doing business.
Yeah, I think so. Consumers are becoming more informed and more demanding, so companies that don't prioritize social and environmental responsibility, they're going to get left behind.
It's not a question of if anymore, it's a question of how, right?
Exactly. And that brings us back to the importance of communication. Because if a company's doing great things, but they can't communicate that effectively, it's almost like it doesn't matter.
Because nobody knows about it.
Right. Communication is that bridge that connects a company's intentions with their actions. It's how they build trust and engage with their stakeholders.
This has been such a great conversation. We've covered a lot of ground. The evolution of CSR, the importance of transparency, storytelling, all of that.
Yeah, and we've also talked about some of the pitfalls to avoid and the benefits of getting it right.
I think we have a good understanding of the role that communication plays in all of this.
And hopefully, our listeners feeling more equipped to be a more discerning consumer and to advocate for companies that are trying to make a real difference.
Okay, so for our final thoughts, let's wrap things up and leave our listener with some food for thought.
Sounds good.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into CSR and communication,
Yeah.
what really stood out to you from Wowcom SIBO's insights?
I think the thing that really stuck with me was how much they emphasize the fact that CSR is always evolving. Like it's not just this static thing, it's constantly changing, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like you can't just set up a CSR program and then forget about it.
Mhm.
Companies have to be willing to adapt and change as the world around them changes too.
Exactly. And that takes, a certain willingness to try new things, to be open to feedback, to admit when they've messed up.
And that idea of continuous learning applies to us as consumers too, right?
Oh, absolutely. The more we know about CSR and how companies communicate about it, the better choices we can make as consumers.
So how can we as individuals, really advocate for CSR? Like what are some things we can actually do?
Well, I think the first step is being mindful of which companies we support. Like choosing to buy from companies that are transparent about their CSR efforts and that align with our own values.
So doing our research before we buy, making sure the brands we're supporting are actually walking the walk when it comes to sustainability and ethics, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes beyond just buying stuff. It's
Yeah.
about how we engage with companies too, like using social media, sending emails, even writing letters to let them know that CSR matters to us.
Yeah, and we can ask them questions, give feedback, encourage them to do better.
Right. It's about using our voices and our wallets to show companies that we care about corporate responsibility. And don't underestimate the power of, collective action.
Right.
When enough consumers come together and demand change, companies pay attention. Like there's so many examples of consumer-led movements that have made a real difference, whether it's about protecting the environment or fair labor practices, all sorts of things.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to see how much impact we can have when we work together.
It really is. And it shows that CSR isn't just the responsibility of companies, it's something we all have a stake in. We all have a role to play in creating a world that's more just and sustainable, right?
Absolutely. So Wow Come SIBO really highlights how crucial communication is for making CSR happen in a meaningful way. It's about companies being transparent and authentic and having a real dialogue with their stakeholders.
And it's about us as consumers being informed and using our voices to push for the changes we want to see in the world.
I think that's a great place to leave it. This deep dive has given us all a lot to think about.
It has.
And hopefully it's inspired you to learn more about CSR and to become a more conscious consumer.
Yeah.
Make your choices matter.
Yeah, every purchase we make, every company we support, it sends a message. So let's make sure we're sending the right message. Let's push for a future where businesses are actually a force for good in the world.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone, and we'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration of a topic that matters